The broker's voice was slick with a practiced sort of pity. "She's a strong girl," he said, his hand gesturing toward Alara as if she were a mule on the block. "Sturdy, wide-hipped and heavy-footed, but a worker. Her father assures me, a tremendous worker." The men gathered in the dusty square of Redemption did not look at her face. They looked at her shoulders, her hands, her thick waist. They assessed her the way they assessed livestock. For strength, for endurance, for the capacity to bear burdens without complaint. Laughter, low and rough, trickled through the crowd. A woman in a calico dress whispered something to her neighbor, her hand covering a smirk. Alara stood on the saloon porch, the splintered wood digging into her palms where she gripped the railing. She was not on the block, not officially, but it was an auction all the same. Her father, having drunk away his last acre, was auctioning off the final thing he owned, his daughter's future. He had arranged a contract, a bond of service to whomever would pay his debts. She was property, a line item in a ledger of failure. The shame was a physical thing, a hot stone in her gut. It had lived there for years, fed by her father's careless cruelty and the town's silent judgment. They saw a large, plain girl, a body to be used. They did not see the mind that could read the turn of a season in the color of the soil, the mind that could tally columns of figures faster than any clerk, the mind that understood the cold, hard mechanics of systems, from water pumps to debt. "She's quiet," the broker added, as if it were a virtue. "Won't give a man any trouble." That was the line, the one that broke the dam of her composure. All the years of being quiet, of making herself small despite her size, of swallowing insults and enduring neglect. It all fractured. She let go of the railing. She took a step forward, into the sliver of sunlight that cut across the porch. The dust motes danced around her. "He is wrong," Alara said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, cut through the murmuring. The broker turned, his smile faltering. The men in the crowd shifted, their gazes finally lifting to her face. "I will give a man trouble," she stated, her eyes locking onto the broker's. "The kind of trouble that comes from being lied to. The kind of trouble that comes from being cheated." She turned her gaze to the crowd, to the smirking woman, to the men who had appraised her like a broodmare. "You think you know what you are looking at," she said, her voice gaining a low, resonant power she did not know she possessed. "You see size and you think it means slow. You see plain and you think it means simple." She took another step, her worn boots solid on the boards. "You are all wrong." A stunned silence fell over the square. No one had expected the object of the transaction to speak. No one had expected her to have a thought, let alone a sharp one. The broker recovered first, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "Now see here, girl. Your father made an agreement." "My father made a mistake," Alara corrected him, her voice cold as river stone. "Many of them. This is just his latest." She held their gazes for a moment longer, a silent declaration that she was not a sack of flour to be traded. She was a person, and she was finished being quiet. Then she turned, walked down the steps, and moved past the stunned faces, heading for the alley between the mercantile and the smithy. She did not run. She walked with a purpose that felt new and terrifying and absolutely necessary. Vuge. The alley smelled of sour mash and rain. It was a liminal space, a crack in the world where things were discarded. She pressed her back against the rough brick wall, the grit scraping her dress, and slid down until she was sitting in the dirt. And then the tears came. They were not quiet tears. They were a storm, a flood of all the unspoken grief, the years of feeling worthless, the sharp, fresh wound of public humiliation. She wept for the girl who had tried so hard to earn a crumb of affection from a father who saw her only as a burden. She wept for the woman who was now utterly, terrifyingly alone. Her sobs were ragged, torn from the deepest part of her. She muffled them in the crook of her arm, her body shaking with the force of the release. When the storm passed, it left behind a cold, desolate calm. The shame was still there, But something else had taken root beside it. A hard, unyielding resolve. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing dirt across her cheek. She would survive this. She had always survived. But surviving was no longer enough. In the gray light of the alley, surrounded by refuse, Elara made a vow. It was a promise whispered to the indifferent bricks and the damp earth. She would never again depend on the kindness or mercy of another person, especially not a man. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed. From now on, her worth would be her own. Her survival would be her own. She would build a fortress inside herself, and no one would ever be given the key. She had come into this world a daughter. She had been made into a commodity. She would leave it as her own master. A shadow fell over the mouth of the alley. Elara looked up, her body tensing. A man stood there, silhouetted against the bright square. He was tall, dressed in worn dungarees and a dusty hat. He did not move into the alley, but stood at its edge, granting her the space. "Miss Elara?" he asked. His voice was low, unhurried. It held none of the broker's slickness or the crowd's derision. It was just a question. She said nothing. She watched him, her hand curling into a fist in the dirt. He took off his hat, holding it in both hands. It was a gesture of respect she had not been shown all day, all year. "I'm Silas," he said. "I'm the one who paid your father's debt." Her heart sank. So she had a master after all. The vow was broken before it had even settled. "The broker said you were a worker," Silas continued, his gaze steady. "He was trying to sell you. I wasn't buying." Elara stared, confused. The words made no sense. "I needed to stop him," Silas said simply. "It was not right what he was doing, what your father was doing." He looked at her, really looked at her, and his eyes were not assessing her body. They were assessing the situation. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence that needs mending, calculating what was broken and what was required to fix it. There was no judgment in it, only practicality. "My wagon is over there," he said, nodding back toward the square. "I have a ranch. It's a few hours from here. There's a room for you. It has a lock on the inside." "A lock on the inside." The words hung in the air. "You would have your own space," he went on, as if explaining the terms of a simple employment. "You would be owed wages for any work you choose to do, and you are free to leave whenever you wish. The debt is paid. It has nothing to do with you." She found her voice, though it was raspy from crying. "Why?" It was the only question that mattered. Kindness without a price was a language she did not speak. Silas considered the question for a moment. He looked down at his hat, then back at her. "Because my mother was a strong woman who was told she was worthless. And I learned to listen to her, not to them." He paused. "And because I can see you are not what they say you are." Elara's breath caught. He saw something, or he thought he did. Suspicion warred with a desperate, unfamiliar flicker of hope. Her vow felt heavy in her chest. Never trust, never depend. "I don't need your charity," she said, the words sharp. "It's not charity," he replied, his tone even. "It's an offer of a job. Housekeeper. The place is a mess. I'm not good at it. I'll pay you a fair wage." He was giving her a way to frame it. A transaction. Something she could understand. Work for pay. Not charity. Not salvation. She slowly, stiffly, got to her feet. She brushed the dirt from her dress, a small, useless gesture of reclaiming her dignity. "And if I refuse?" she challenged. "Then I'll wish you well," Silas said, without a hint of pressure. "And I'll leave you $20 for a fresh start. The debt is paid either way. It's not your burden." She looked at his face. It was weathered, carved by sun and wind. There were no tricks in his eyes, just a quiet, waiting stillness. He was offering her a choice, a real one. She thought of her vow, self-reliance. This was a path to it, a wage, a room with a lock, a chance to gather herself and decide her next move. It was better than staying in redemption, where every face would remind her of her shame. "All right," she said, the word feeling small and momentous. "I'll take the job." Silas nodded once. "Good." He put his hat back on and turned to walk toward his wagon, leaving her to follow. He didn't try to help her. He didn't touch her. He simply led the way, trusting she would keep up. As she stepped out of the alley and into the light, she felt the gazes of the townspeople. But this time she did not shrink from them. She kept her eyes on the back of the tall, quiet man walking ahead of her. The wagon ride was silent. The clatter of the wheels and the rhythmic plodding of the horses were the only sounds. Alara sat on the hard wooden bench, her hands clenched in her lap. She watched the familiar, hated landscape of Redemption recede, replaced by rolling hills dotted with stubborn scrub oak. Silas did not speak. He seemed comfortable in the silence, his attention on the road and the horses. He did not ask her about her father, or the scene in the square, or her life before. The lack of questions was a gift. It allowed the quiet in her mind to slowly return. They had been on the road for over an hour when he finally spoke. "Are you hungry?" The question was so simple, so direct, it startled her. She realized she was famished. The stone of shame in her stomach had been replaced by a hollow ache. She hadn't eaten since the night before. She gave a small, hesitant nod. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop under the shade of a large cottonwood. He reached into a sack behind the seat and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. Inside were 2 thick slices of bread with a piece of smoked ham between them and a hard yellow apple. It was plain, simple food. He then took out another bundle for himself and began to eat, his back turned slightly toward her, giving her a measure of privacy. She ate. She ate with a hunger that was almost painful. The bread was coarse, the ham salty. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. No one had ever simply offered her food without comment. At home, her father would watch her eat, his eyes full of resentment, as if every bite she took was stolen from him. The town matrons watched her, their lips thin with disapproval of her appetite, her size. But Silas just ate his own food, letting her be. It was a small thing, a sandwich, an apple, an averted gaze. But it was the first act of non-transactional kindness she had received in so long. It felt like a miracle. A tiny crack appeared in the wall she had just built around her heart. She finished the last bite and held the empty cloth in her hands, not knowing what to do with it. Silas finished a moment later. He glanced at her, saw the empty cloth, and simply took it from her, placing it back in the sack without a word. Then he clicked the reins and the wagon moved on. Ja. The ranch was not what she expected. It was not a grand operation. It was a modest collection of buildings hunkered down in a wide, wind-scoured valley. The house was solid, made of timber and stone, but the paint was peeling. The barn roof had a patch on it. The fences were sturdy but in need of mending in several places. The place felt like Silas, functional, enduring, but struggling. An older man with a face like a dried apple came out of the barn as they pulled up. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked from Silas to Alara. His eyes narrowed. "Jed," Silas said by way of greeting. "This is Alara. She'll be helping with the house." Jed grunted. He looked Alara up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment. She braced herself for the familiar assessment, the judgment. Instead, he just nodded. "Supper's on the stove." "Mostly." He turned and went back into the barn. "Jed's the foreman," Silas explained. "He's been here longer than I have." Silas led her to the house. The inside was worse than the outside. Dishes were piled in the sink. Dust lay thick on every surface. A stack of papers and ledgers teetered on the edge of the main table. It was the chaos of a place without a center, a home run by men who had too much work to do outside to care about the inside. To Alara, it was not chaos. It was a system that had broken down, and she knew how to fix systems. "The room is this way," Silas said, leading her down a short hall. He opened a door. "This was my mother's." The room was small and simple, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window that looked out over the valley. It was clean, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. He had prepared it for her. On the inside of the door was a simple brass lock and a key. "The key," Silas said, pointing to it. He met her eyes. "So you know." She nodded, her throat tight. "I'll leave you to get settled," he said, and closed the door behind him. She walked over to the door and touched the lock. She turned the key. The click was a solid, satisfying sound. Safety. For the first time in her life, she had a room of her own. A place no one could enter without her permission. She did not rest. She put her small bundle of belongings on the bed and went back out into the main room. She rolled up her sleeves. She started with the kitchen. She heated water on the stove. She scrubbed the dishes until they shone. She scoured the countertops. She swept the floor. She worked with a methodical, silent efficiency. This was a language she understood. Order from chaos. It was like solving an equation. She found potatoes and onions and a bit of salt pork. She peeled and chopped, her hands moving with practiced speed. She added them to the pot Jed had left on the stove, tasting the thin broth and adding herbs she found in a dusty jar. By the time Silas and Jed came in for the night, the kitchen was transformed. It was clean. It was organized. And the air was filled with the rich smell of a proper stew. They stopped in the doorway, surprised. Silas looked around, at the clean surfaces, the neat stacks, the simmering pot. He looked at her, standing by the stove with a ladle in her hand. Jed sniffed the air. He walked over to the pot, lifted the lid, and looked inside. He looked at Alara. "Ha," he said. It was a single, dry syllable. But in it, Alara heard something that sounded almost like approval. They ate at the cleared table. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one in the wagon. It was the comfortable silence of tired men at the end of a long day. When Silas finished, he pushed his bowl back. "Supper was good," he said. It was a simple statement. For words. But coming from him after this day, it felt like a coronation. Chug. The days settled into a rhythm. Alara imposed her quiet order on the house until it ran with the quiet efficiency of a well-oiled machine. She rose before the sun, had coffee ready when Silas and Jed came in from the first chores, and a hot breakfast on the table shortly after. She washed, she mended, she baked. But her mind was not quiet. As she worked, she watched. She watched the way the wind moved down the valley. She watched the way the cattle favored the east pasture, even though the grass looked thinner there. She watched the two young hands, boys named Billy and Tom, struggle with a broken pump that fed the main water trough. She listened. She heard Silas and Jed talking in low, worried tones about the north pasture, how the creek that fed it had slowed to a trickle, leaving the grass to turn yellow and brittle. It was their best grazing land, and without it, they would have to sell off part of the herd before winter. They had tried clearing the creek bed, assuming a blockage. It hadn't worked. The water level remained stubbornly low. One afternoon, she walked out to the edge of the property, her hands tucked into the pockets of the apron she wore. She stood on a rise, looking down at the parched north pasture and the thin ribbon of the creek. In the house, tucked away in a dusty chest, she had found old survey maps of the ranch. Her mind had absorbed them, memorized the contours, the water sources, the lines of ownership. The problem was not a blockage. The problem was the land itself. That evening, as Silas and Jed stared grimly at a map spread on the table, she spoke. "You're digging in the wrong place," she said quietly. They both looked up, surprised. She rarely spoke during their evening strategy sessions. Silas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She stepped forward and put her finger on the map. It was a large, work-roughened finger, but it moved with precision. "The creek bed has shifted over the years," she explained. "The original survey is from 50 years ago. The water table isn't where it used to be. Here," she traced a line with her nail, "the ground has subsided. The water is bleeding out underground, long before it reaches the pasture." Jed stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. You're wasting your time clearing the old channel, she continued. You need to dig a new one, a diversion. From here, her finger moved to a point a half-mile upstream. To here, it's a shorter distance and the gradient is steeper. You'll get more water to the pasture, and you'll lose less of it along the way. There was a long silence. Jed looked from the map to her, then back to the map. He squinted, tracing the line she had indicated. Silas was just looking at her. The assessing gaze was back, but it was different now. It was filled with a dawning, undisguised awe. How do you know that? He asked, his voice soft. I look at things, she said simply. I see how they fit together. The maps, the way the soil looks on the west ridge, the kind of trees that grow near the spring. It's all part of the same system. Jed let out a slow breath. By God, he whispered. She's right. The next morning, they dug where she told them to dig. By midday, a steady, healthy flow of water was pouring into the north pasture for the first time in months. That evening, Silas found her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the newly watered valley in shades of gold and purple. He stood beside her, not speaking for a long time. Thank you, he finally said. I was just looking at things, she repeated. No, he said. It was more than that. He turned to face her. The ledgers, the books for the ranch, they're in a mess. I'm good with cattle, not with numbers. He paused, and the question was plain even before he asked it. Would you look at them? He asked. See how they fit together. He was not asking her to cook or clean. He was asking her to use her mind, the part of her that everyone else had always ignored. Yes, she said. I'll look at them. He gave a single, grateful nod. Then he asked the question that changed everything. What else can you do?
Vuge.
The ledgers were a disaster. They were a testament to Silas's faith in handshakes and his aversion to paperwork. Entries were scrawled, receipts were missing, and the columns rarely added up. For 3 days, Elara sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet around her. She did not just tally the numbers. She read them. To her, they told a story. She saw the story of 2 hard winters, a bad run of luck with calving, the falling price of beef. But underneath that story, she found another one, quieter, more insidious tale. It was in the feed bills from Sterling Mercantile in town. Small overcharges, consistently applied. 10 cents here, 15 cents there. Pennies that bled the ranch dry over years. It was in the invoices for supplies that were never delivered. A new pump gasket, 100 feet of wire, a set of gears for the mill. All signed for, but nowhere to be found on the ranch. It was in the recurring pattern of financial strain that always seemed to hit just before Silas was due to make a bank payment. And on nearly every fraudulent document, one name appeared. A signature authorizing payment, a note confirming delivery. Sterling, Silas's friend, the man who ran the mercantile, the man who sat on the board of the bank that held the loan on the ranch. She worked methodically, creating a new ledger. In it, she copied the entries, highlighting the discrepancies in red ink. She created a separate list. The phantom supplies, the consistent overcharges, the dates. The pattern was undeniable. It was not bad luck that was killing this ranch. It was sabotage. A long, slow, deliberate campaign to bleed Silas dry and force him into foreclosure. When she was finished, she had a slim, neat book that was a testament to years of betrayal. She waited until Jed and the hands had gone to the bunkhouse for the night. She placed the new ledger on the table in front of Silas. The ranch isn't failing, Silas, she said. It's being robbed. He opened the book. He saw the neat columns, the red ink, the cold, hard facts. He traced the lines with his finger, his face growing harder, colder with every page. When he got to the final summary page, where she had tallied the total amount stolen over 5 years, he closed his eyes. Sterling, he said. The name was not a question. It was a curse. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His fists were clenched, his whole body radiating a cold, dangerous fury. I'm going into town. No, Elara said, standing to face him. That's what he wants. He's been my friend since we were boys, Silas said, his voice raw with betrayal. He's been eating at my table while he picked my pocket. And he will deny it, Elara said, her voice firm. You have no proof, only my numbers. It will be your word against his. He is a respected man in town. You are a struggling rancher. Who will they believe? He knew she was right. The fury in him warred with the bitter truth. Before he could answer, the sound of an approaching carriage broke the night's stillness. A moment later, a polished, handsome buggy pulled up in front of the house. A man stepped down. He was dressed in a fine wool coat and polished boots that seemed to sneer at the dust of the yard. He was smiling. It was Sterling. He walked to the open door and peered inside, his smile widening as he saw Silas. Silas, my friend. Just the man I wanted to see. His gaze slid past Silas and landed on Elara. It was a dismissive, appraising look. His smile became condescending. Well, Sterling said, his voice dripping with false charm. I heard you'd acquired some new help. After that unfortunate business in town. The casual cruelty of the remark was a physical blow. He was reminding her of her shame, putting her in her place, establishing his dominance. He was telling Silas that he had brought something sullied into his home. Silas took a step forward, his body tensed like a coiled spring. But Elara put a hand on his arm. It was a light touch, but it stopped him. She met Sterling's gaze. Her face was calm, her eyes unblinking. She did not let him see the wound he had just inflicted. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice perfectly even. Silas and I were just going over the books. It's been very illuminating. Sterling's smile tightened at the edges. He had expected a cowering, shamed woman. He had not expected this quiet, unnerving composure. He saw for the first time that she was not just a piece of furniture. She was a variable he had not accounted for. The battle lines had just been drawn, and he had no idea what kind of war he had just started. Ja. He knows, Elara said after Sterling had made his excuses and left, his charm curdling into irritation. He came here to see what you knew, to see me. Silas sank back into his chair, the rage replaced by a heavy, grim understanding. What do we do? The word hung in the air between them. It was an acknowledgement, a confirmation. They were in this together. We do nothing, Elara said. Not yet. We let him think he's still in control. We let him think I am just a housekeeper, and you are just an angry, foolish man who can be easily provoked. She tapped the ledger she had made. But we gather more. We need more than just numbers. We need proof he can't deny. And so they formed their quiet alliance. Silas, the man of action, learned the difficult patience of strategy. Elara, the woman of systems, became the general in a silent war. Sterling, sensing the shift, began to escalate. He could no longer bleed the ranch quietly. He had to break it. The rumors started first. Whispers in town, cultivated by Sterling over drinks at the saloon. Silas had lost his mind. He'd brought a fat, disgraced woman to his ranch. She was a witch, some said, who had enchanted him. They were living in sin. The fickle townspeople, who had once pitted Silas, now judged him. Next came the direct attacks. A section of fence was cut in the night, and 20 head of cattle wandered off, lost to the canyons. Silas and the hands spent 3 days rounding them up, losing precious time. A trough near the line shack was found to be fouled with oil, sickening 2 steers. Then the official pressure began. A notice from the bank arrived, moving up the date of his next payment, citing a clause in his loan agreement about ranch viability. The letter was signed by the bank president, but the strategy was pure Sterling. With every blow, Silas's resolve hardened, but Elara saw the toll it was taking. The worry etched new lines around his eyes. The weight of his father's legacy, of the ranch he was trying to save, was crushing him. And the town's poison began to seep under her own skin. The whispers confirmed her deepest fear. that she was a curse, a burden, that her presence was the cause of all this trouble. If she had never come here, Sterling would not have been threatened. Silas would not be under such direct attack. One afternoon, she went to town with Billy for supplies. As she waited in the mercantile, Sterling's mercantile, she heard two women talking behind a stack of flour sacks. "It's a shame what's happened to Silas Blackwood," one said. "He was always such a good man, but that woman, she's dragging him down with her. I heard the bank is going to foreclose," the other whispered. "He'll lose everything. All for her." The words were like stones, hitting the old, bruised parts of her soul. She fled the store, leaving Billy to finish the errand. She walked back to the ranch, the 5 miles a blur of dust and self-loathing. They were right. She was the problem. She had brought this storm down on the one person who had shown her kindness. The only way to save him was to remove herself from the equation. That night, she packed her small bag. She wrote a note explaining the rest of her findings about Sterling, outlining a plan for Silas to use. She would leave before dawn. She would disappear, and the trouble would leave with her. She was standing in the dark kitchen, her bag in her hand, when a floorboard creaked behind her. Silas stood in the doorway, a lamp in his hand. He had not been sleeping. He saw the bag. He saw the look on her face, and he understood. "Don't," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm the reason this is happening," she whispered, tears she had sworn she would never shed again blurring her vision. "If I leave, he'll have no reason to. You are the reason this ranch is still breathing." He cut her off, his voice rising with a passion she had never heard from him. He crossed the room in 2 strides, standing before her. He did not touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. "This place was dying long before you came. I was losing, and I didn't even know how. You showed me. You gave me a weapon. You gave me a chance." He looked at her, his eyes blazing in the lamplight. "He's not attacking me because of you. He's attacking me because he is afraid of you. He sees your mind, and it terrifies him. They're saying—" "I don't give a damn what they're saying," he thundered. "Do you think I care about the whispers of fools who wouldn't know a good woman if she saved their miserable lives? I have been defending you, Alara, in town. To anyone who will listen." The fight went out of her. He had been defending her. Quiet, stoic Silas had been fighting for her honor. "You are not a burden," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce, low intensity. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to this land. To me. Don't you dare run away and prove them right. Don't you dare take that away from us." The word echoed the "we" from before. It was a foundation. Before she could answer, a frantic pounding came at the door. It was Billy, his face pale with panic and lit by a terrifying, flickering orange glow from outside. "Silas," he yelled. "It's the barn. The whole thing's on fire." The final attack had come. The barn fire was an inferno. Flames devoured the dry timber, roaring into the night sky, a funeral pyre for the ranch's future. All the winter hay, the grain, the tools, all of it was turning to ash. As they ran toward the blaze, a scream cut through the roar. "Tom! He's in there!" Jed yelled, pointing toward the small tack room at the side of the barn. He went in for the new saddles. A section of the roof collapsed, sending a shower of embers into the sky. The tack room doorway was an arch of fire. Silas had a choice. Terrible one. He could try to organize a bucket brigade, try to save some small part of his livelihood, or he could go after the boy. It was not a choice for him. Without a word, he grabbed a wet horse blanket from a trough and plunged into the flames. Alara watched him disappear into the fiery maw. For a heart-stopping minute, there was nothing. Then he emerged, half carrying, half dragging the coughing, soot-covered form of Tom. He got the boy clear just as the entire barn roof gave way with a deafening crash. He had saved the boy. He had lost the barn. He had lost everything. In that moment, watching him help Tom to his feet, his face grim but resolute, Alara's last wall of defense crumbled. Her vow of self-reliance had been about survival. But what Silas had just done, was about something more. It was about worth. A boy's life was worth more than a barn. It was a simple, absolute truth. And her quiet, strategic fight was worth more than her fear. Her commitment was no longer about earning her place. It was about defending her home.
Vugie.
The foreclosure hearing was set for 2 weeks later. The fire was the final nail. Without the barn or the winter feed, there was no way Silas could meet the bank's accelerated demand. It was a formality. Sterling would get the land. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, in the same town square where Ilara had been shamed. The room was packed. The same faces were there, the curious, the judgmental, the fickle townspeople who had come to witness the final fall of the Blackwood Ranch. Sterling sat at the front with his lawyer, looking confident and somber, the very picture of a reluctant benefactor forced to act. Silas sat beside Ilara. He was wearing his clean but frayed church suit. He looked defeated. He had given up. But Ilara had not. When the proceedings began, Sterling's lawyer laid out a simple, tragic case. A good man, Silas Blackwood, who had fallen on hard times, made poor decisions, and suffered a final, catastrophic loss. The bank, he argued, had no choice but to foreclose to protect its interests. When he was finished, the judge, a man who owed his position to Sterling, looked at Silas. "Mr. Blackwood, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Silas started to shake his head, but Ilara placed a hand on his arm. "We do, Your Honor," she said, standing up. A murmur went through the room. Sterling's lawyer scoffed. "Your Honor, this woman has no legal standing here." "She speaks for the ranch," Silas said, his voice quiet but firm. The judge hesitated, then shrugged. "Very well. Proceed." Ilara walked to the front of the room. She was not carrying a ledger. She was carrying a large, rolled-up map. She tacked it to the wall. It was the survey map of the ranch. "The Blackwood Ranch is not failing due to bad luck or bad management," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It is being systematically dismantled by Mr. Sterling." Sterling laughed, a short, sharp bark of derision. Ilara ignored him. She used the map as her guide, her finger tracing the story. She spoke of the overcharges, the phantom supplies, the manufactured crises timed to coincide with bank payments. She didn't use the ledger. She had memorized it. She recited dates, figures, and invoice numbers from memory. The room grew quiet. This was not the rambling of a madwoman. This was a precise, logical indictment. "These are baseless accusations," Sterling's lawyer protested. "They are facts," Ilara countered. "And I have one final fact," she turned to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, your mercantile delivered 3 tons of winter feed to the Blackwood Ranch on October 1st of last year. Did it not? An order you personally approved." Sterling, confident, nodded. "Of course. I am always helping my friends. And you billed Silas for that feed, which he paid for." "Naturally." Ilara pointed to a section of the map, a parcel of land at the far western edge. "This section of the ranch, the West Meadow, was sold by Silas's father 2 years ago to pay a debt. It has not been part of the Blackwood Ranch since that time. The cattle have not grazed there. The fences were moved." She looked at the judge, then at the room. "The delivery invoice, signed by Mr. Sterling, specifies that the 3 tons of feed were for the livestock in the West Meadow." A confused silence fell. Ilara's voice dropped, becoming sharp as a razor. "Why, Mr. Sterling, would you deliver and bill for feed to a pasture that you knew had not belonged to Silas for over a year? A man who knew the ranch would know that. But a man creating fraudulent invoices from a desk in town? He might make that mistake. He might forget what he'd already stolen. The trap was sprung. It was perfect. It was a logical fallacy only the guilty party could have made. Sterling's face went pale, then purple with rage. The mask of the charming benefactor shattered. He shot to his feet, his finger stabbing the air at her. "You expect these good people to believe this fat heifer?" he snarled, his voice venomous. This thing Silas bought for pocket change? She is a liar and a whore, and she has poisoned him against me. The room went dead silent. The ugliness of his words, the sheer vitriol, hung in the air. He had not denied the accusation. He had attacked the accuser. In that moment, everyone in the room saw him for exactly what he was. He had confirmed everything she said. The judge stared at him, his face a mask of shock and disgust. He banged his gavel. "Sheriff," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Arrest this man." Chaos erupted. As the sheriff led a sputtering, defeated Sterling away, a sound started at the back of the room. It was a single person clapping. Then another, and another. Soon, the entire room was filled with applause. It was a thunderous, rolling sound. It was for her. Alara stood frozen, the sound washing over her. It was the complete, disorienting opposite of the laughter that had haunted her for so long. Silas came to her side. He did not speak. He simply put a hand on the small of her back, a warm, solid pressure, a silent anchor in the storm of her vindication. Gee, the ride back to the ranch was quiet. The foreclosure was dismissed. The bank, under investigation, was now falling over itself to offer Silas a new, fair loan. The town that had scorned her now saw her as a hero. But the barn was still a charred ruin. The work was just beginning. They pulled up to the house. The setting sun cast long shadows, making the blackened timbers of the barn look like the ribs of a fallen giant. The mood was somber, but not hopeless. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the victory has been won. That evening, after a simple meal, Silas motioned for her to join him on the porch. He was holding a piece of paper. He didn't sit. He stood before her, the paper in his hands. "This is a deed," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's for the quarter section to the north, the part with the good water, the part you saved." He held it out to her. "It's in your name," he said. "Alara." She stared at the paper, at her name written in his careful, blocky script. She didn't take it. "Silas, I can't." "This is not a gift," he said, his voice firm, cutting her off. "You earned this. You saved this land. A piece of it belongs to you. By right." He pushed the paper gently toward her again. "You owe me nothing for it. It is yours." He took a breath, and the hardest part of his speech came out. "And I am not asking you to marry me. I am not trying to trap you, or own you, or put you under any obligation." He looked her straight in the eye, his gaze clear and honest. "I am asking you to stay, as a partner, as an equal, as you." He was offering her a home, not just a room with a lock, but a piece of the earth itself. He was offering her a permanent place, without condition, without price. He was asking her to choose. Her vow, made in that desperate alley, echoed in her mind. Never depend on anyone. But she had been wrong. Dependence wasn't the trap. Obligation was, and he was offering her a future free of it. She finally took the deed from his hand. The paper felt heavy, real. "I will not be your housekeeper, Silas," she said, her voice steady. A flicker of hurt crossed his face before she continued. "I will be your partner," she said. "I will help you rebuild that barn. I will help you manage the herd. And I will make sure no one ever cheats you again." She looked up at him, a small, true smile touching her lips for the first time. "I am choosing to stay." Relief washed over his face. So profound it was, as if he had been holding his breath since the day he met her. "Good," he said. The word was full of quiet joy. She stepped forward, folding the deed and tucking it into her apron pocket. She stood beside him at the porch railing, and together they looked out at the land, their land. The sky was a deep, star-dusted velvet. The air was cool and smelled of dust and pine and the faint, lingering scent of smoke. It smelled like a new beginning. He didn't speak. He just reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. It was not a gesture of ownership or even comfort. It was a simple, solid statement of presence. A quiet acknowledgement. "I am here. You are here. We are here together." The weight of it felt like an anchor, holding her fast to the only home she had ever truly known. And it was enough.